Hi there, my name is Ben Terwilliger. I'm the Executive Director of the Eudora Community Museum here in downtown Eudora, Kansas. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you on a live tour of our museum. Of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been closed to the public since March 14th. Of course, we would love to reopen to the public, but we won't do that until it's safe to do so. So hopefully we can reopen soon, but we'll wait for the the proper authorities to say that it's safe to reopen, at which point we'll of course reopen. And but in the meantime, since people can't actually physically come here in person and see our museum, I figured I'd take you on kind of a brief virtual tour of our museum here in downtown Eudora. There's really no way to see everything in a little tour like this, so that's not really feasible. But I will try to show you some of the basic, most important things that we have in here, as well as give you a little bit of the history of our building here. And of course, when we do reopen, we want everyone to come down here and check us out, and not only check us out, but also come to the other businesses here in downtown Eudora. You know, downtown Eudora is a very important part of our community, and we've done a lot of work ourselves trying to do as much as we can to promote the downtown area. And it's really important to support local businesses. So when all these businesses reopen, be sure to come down here in downtown Eudora and visit us and visit all the other businesses, and that'd be really appreciated. So the Eudora Community Museum's been in operation since 2004. It used to be in the old middle school building, which was at 10th and Main Street. And then in 2011 we moved to the Nottingham School, and then in 2015 we moved into this building. This building's at 720 Main Street in downtown Eudora. The Trebs family gave us this building in 2013, and it took a lot of work to rehab this building and make it so it was a fit to be a public building. So in 2013 we started to raise money, and we had a team of volunteer laborers who helped us restore this building. And we moved in here in 2015, and then we've been working on the second story, which is mostly completed as well. So this building has a lot of history itself. This, from what I can tell based on the research I've done, the northern part of our building was first built around 1866 by a man named Henry Koch, who was a German immigrant. And it was also expanded on by another German immigrant named John Siebold. And he was a tinsmith. It was the post office at one point, and it was in the Trebs family for about 100 years. I think many people remember this as the Trebs building. Freddie Trebs had a plumbing shop in here for about 40 years or so until he retired in the 90s. And then his daughter, Pam Staub, was very nice to give us this building in 2013. And we've been very happy in it ever since. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on kind of a tour of our museum exhibits, and also just a tour of the building itself. So we can go ahead and start that, turn the camera around. So that's the front door. The first thing you see when you walk in is this. It's kind of hard to see with the glare, but that's a picture of Eudora Fish, who the town is named after, of course. We have the original tin-type photograph of Eudora in our storage. That's just a copy, of course. But we have the only known image of Eudora Fish, which is one of our most prized possessions, you could say. And here's a really neat speech by her dad, Pascal Fish, which I encourage people to read online. You can read it on our Facebook page. Some of the other first things you see is a variety of our Native American artifacts. These artifacts come from Lorene Cox, who lives in Fall Leaf, and she's been nice enough to loan us these items. What we're looking at right here, these are pottery fragments from Delaware Native Americans who lived on the northern banks of the Kansas River. Over here we have an assortment of arrowheads that were found in the area. Of course, humans have lived in this area, in this part of Kansas, for thousands of years. Americans have only lived here since, the 1850s. There's thousands and thousands of years of history that are in this part of the world, and we know very little about them other than some artifacts that we can find. So it's always an incredible feat when we can find arrowheads and other Native American artifacts. Also in this case is just a variety of other Eudora related items. Eudora Depot sign store, some Christmas ornaments of Eudora businesses. That register of deeds is from the courthouse from when Sue Newstifter was the register of deeds. She was nice enough to give that to us. And we have a lot of other Eudora souvenirs, I would say, things that you could buy in stores here, mostly in the mid-20th century. A lot of these items were sold in the Trev's Variety Store at 724 Main Street. That's a picture of Dobbs Clark, who was an eccentric person here in town that seemed to elicit very divided opinions. Some people liked him. Some people really didn't like him. At any rate, he was very notable in that just about everyone remembers him who was alive at the time. He died in 1973. This is one of the more eye-catching items in our collection. This is a model of a sulfuric acid concentrating plant. This was out at the Sunflower Ammunition Plant. Back in 2012, we were invited to go out to the Sunflower plant, and they had this sitting there in one of their outbuildings, and they were nice enough to give it to us. Of course, the actual sulfuric acid plant, we have a picture of it right there. That was a very large building out there. It was built in the 1980s. They've since torn it down, like they've torn down a lot of buildings out at the Sunflower plant. But the model remains, and it's one of our more eye-catching pieces, I think, in our museum. That right there, that's a picture of Peter Hartig. He was one of the original settlers here in Eudora. The kind of funny, tragic story about him is that, so he came out here in 1857 before the railroad came out here. The railroad didn't come through Eudora until about 1872. And it's kind of ironic that Peter Hartig fought ferociously for the railroad not to cut through his property, which it ended up doing. The railroad went right through his property, and you can understand why he protested. 30 years later, in the early 1900s, he was killed by a train on his property. So maybe he had some premonition that trains would not be a promising future for him. But the descendants of the Hartigs were very nice enough to give us that portrait of him several years ago. This is our case on the Eudora Oddfellows. The Oddfellows have their lodge hall right across the street, right there at 711 Main Street. And they've been around since about 1866. And these are some of the ceremonial gowns that the Oddfellows wear at their ceremonies and at their meetings. We have an assortment of other Oddfellows related items here as well. Jim Harris has brought us a lot of these items, and there's a nice old picture of what the Oddfellow Lodge looked like, about 100 years ago or so. Up here, we have a new addition. This is a trunk that belonged to Mike Schoper, and his descendant, Mike Schoper, gave it to our museum here a little bit ago. And you can note the unique spelling of his name there. It's obviously a German spelling. The Schopers were, of course, German immigrants. That's just a Nottingham painting we have, and the portrait of Roberta Nottingham, which hung at the Nottingham School for many, many years, and we have it now in our museum building. That's the 1918 cornerstone from the high school that was at 10th and Main Street. That building was built in 1918. It was torn down in 1990 or 1991, which was controversial at the time. But we had the cornerstone. The school district was nice enough to give that to us. We have the cornerstone from the Nottingham School as well. When it was first opened, it was called the Eudora Elementary School. They didn't name it Nottingham until 1968. There was a time capsule in the top of this, which we opened in 2017 when we were hosting a Smithsonian exhibit here at the museum, which was a big deal for us. And throughout the museum, you just have, various pictures of downtown Eudora. And that's a painting of the old rail depot, which burned down in 1990. We have an assortment of Eudora-related postcards here, painting of the high school. This is the old Eudora Mailbox from the early 20th century. This has pretty much always been in this building because our building here at 720 Main Street was the Eudora Post Office from about 1897 until maybe the early 1920s. So this post office box was in this building. The Treves family gave it to us. We moved it out to the Nottingham School, and then we moved it back here when we moved back here. So aside from a few years, this has been in this building for about 125 years or so. That's the altar railing from the Salem Chapel. Another interesting note about these boxes is on the back side of them, you still have a lot of the old names from people from, you know, the early 20th century. Probably some people's ancestors that are still here in town. We have a case on the Pilla store here. The Pilla store was operated by the Pilla brothers pretty much since the founding of Eudora. And descendants of the Pillas have been nice enough to give us a lot of these items, and other people as well. This is an aerial shot of Eudora from about 1967. And that's one from about 1976. You can see the construction of the modern K-10 highway right there. We have pictures of some of the old mayors of Eudora, which were recently given to us by City Hall. This is a display case that was originally at the Watkins Museum. And it shows a map of the Blue Jacket Ford of the Oregon Trail over the Wakarusa River. You can see the map of it right there. And these items were actually dug up at that crossing by a local metal detector enthusiast, and he was nice enough to loan them to our museum, and they're on display here. So a lot of these items fell off of, you know, travelers who were crossing the ford there. The ford was operated by a man named Charles Blue Jacket. He was a Shawnee Native American, and he had a house over there by the crossing, and during times of high water, he would ferry people across the Wakarusa River. A lot of time the river was low enough that you could just walk across it, but sometimes it was too high for that. The Kansas River had a ferry on it operated by Pascal Fish, and Pascal Fish was probably most known as a ferryman. He operated a ferry over the river for many years. This is a display case on various high school athletic pieces. Right there, those are Benny Dean's basketball shorts from the 1950s. Those are Gary Scott's from the 1970s. That's a cheerleading uniform worn by Debbie Cardin. That's Freddie Treves' football jersey from the 1930s. That's a Letterman jacket from Eudora High from the 1970s. That is the miniature height cheerleading uniform that was worn by Penny Neff, probably in the early 1970s. Those were football cleats that I believe belonged to Jim Harris from the 1950s. And there's a picture of Debbie in her cheerleading outfit. Some various class rings. This is a ceremonial football trophy from the 1920s, showing Eudora's dominance over DeSoto. Over here is our exhibit on the Kaw River, and it basically talks about all the other water-related history relating to the Eudora area. And what's interesting about Wakarusa is how it got its name. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Wakarusa is a Native American word that means hip deep, allegedly because that's how deep the water was when you walked across it. And it's really interesting to read these old accounts of how crystal clear the water was in the Wakarusa River before, you know, Americans started to move out here, which, of course, the river isn't that crystal clear today. And talks about the Native Americans along the rivers here, various ferries that were operated here, as well as some of the fishermen that were in the Eudora area. That's a picture of the footbridge that was across the Wakarusa River in the early 20th century. It's my understanding you can still see some remnants of that today if you travel up the Wakarusa River. That's a picture of the old bridge over the Kansas River, which was wiped out by an ice jam in the 20th century. Here we have a really neat, I believe it's a cheese box that was made by a local artist, and she wood burned a bunch of the historic buildings in Eudora into it. This is a couch or a settee that was made by Charles Durr. Charles Durr was one of the original founders of Eudora in 1857, and he made this in the 1870s. It was in the Watkins Museum for many years and the Watkins Museum was nice enough to give it to us several years ago. Charles Durr also made this. This is a baby's Highchair, also from the 1870s. From the Leonard Hallman estate, we got this. This is a stained glass window from St. Paul Church, which has been in Eudora, in operation in Eudora for over 150 years now. This is a safe from the Selzer Blacksmith Shop in Clearfield. It still works, not very well, but you can still open it. We have a school from the Midland desk, a desk from the Midland School, rather, on display there. This desk right here is from the original Eudora Post Office from the 1850s. Again, this is a piece given to us by the Watkins Museum. This right here is probably the most notable thing that was ever invented in Eudora. It's called a Splint Roll. It was invented by Dr. Leo Lauber, and he mass-produced these here in Eudora, and it was a very successful business. They sold these from coast to coast. They actually made them in that building right there, the red brick building across the street there at first, until they moved out to the business park on the eastern side of town. Over here we have a signed picture of all the players on the 2014 state championship basketball team with Mitchell Ballack, which was a really big deal when Eudora won the state championship back then. We have that program signed from it as well. Over here we have an assortment of sunflower ammunition plant related artifacts. These were given to us by the plant itself in about 2012. And we have a lot more in addition to this, as well as a lot of research and archival files on the sunflower plant and Hercules Powder, which was the company that operated the plant for most of its existence. That sign is from the Eudora High School. It was built in probably about 1950-something. It's a 1950s era sign, which Leonard Hallman salvaged for us before they tore down that building in 2011. This is our Bicentennial Quilt. That was made in 1976. Various women stitched these individually, and they stitched it together, which is really nice. This is our Sesquicentennial Quilt. This was made in 2007 to commemorate Eudora's 150th birthday, and it has the City of Eudora seal on it. This is basically our research library here. We have just about everything that's ever been written about Eudora, as well as some other from Douglas County as well. We have quite a bit of genealogy, lots of photos, a lot of Eudora High School yearbooks. When people want to come in here and research, this is about the first place I usually take people to. Over here we have just a small store where we sell a few items to try to make some money to keep the museum in operation. I'll take you over here now. This is a World War II uniform that was worn by Ray Weinbach, and he was nice enough to give this to us many years ago, and he's still alive, actually. I still see him here in downtown Eudora every now and then. And that's a picture of him in his uniform there, as well as some other mementos that he gathered from the when he was fighting in World War II. This is kind of just a random case full of random things here, including the game of Eudora. Some other things right here. Some of the nails that survived the Eudora train depot, which burned down in 1990. Over here, I think, are some of our pretty cool items here. Those are some wood bowling balls and wood bowling pins from the Chopper Bowling Alley. And there you can see the Chopper Bowling Alley right there. That was built in the early 1920s, and it was an outdoor bowling alley, and it was located on the Chopper Farm on 10th Street by the Wakarusa River. That's a Eudora High School basketball uniform from the late 19-teens. Over here we have a Eudora lumber apron. If you can see over there, that's just a commemorative stamp of Hugh Beaumont, or an envelope rather. He was born, allegedly, in the Eudora area in 1909. So we claim him as one of our own, and he is one of the most famous people to ever come out of Eudora. That chair right there, that was in this building, and Leonard Hallman restored it. I don't know how much money he's paid to restore it, but it looks a heck of a lot nicer now than it did when we first saw it. That's a trunk that has been in the Durr family for many years. A.F. Durr, you can see right there. That's a model of the Salem Chapel that was built by Allen Westerhouse, I think in the 1970s. Here we have an old football uniform from the late 1940s. The Eudora High School football team went undefeated in 1948. This is our case on the Eudora Police Department. Bill Long gave us a lot of the items that you see here a couple of years ago, which is really nice of him. Here we have an assortment of Eudora hats, a lot of fire department equipment. This is one of our display cases on the Scouts in Eudora, and lots of people have been nice enough to give us these items over the years. This is a little exhibit on the rehabilitation of our museum property here. That piece of glass was one of the windows here on the front of the building for many years. And that's Fern Long. She was the first president of the Historical Society, one of our founders. And we have a variety of little things that were discovered in this building during the rehabilitation process, which was a very long, time-consuming but rewarding process. Over here we have a telephone that belonged to Charles Pilla. He was one of the first people in Eudora to have a telephone. He was one of the richest men in town, so that kind of explains that. This was another thing brought to us by Leonard Hallman. Leonard Hallman is probably responsible for a third of the items in here. He passed away in 2016, but before he did, he was very generous and he brought us a lot of items. That's a viewfinder, which is what kids used to do for fun 100 years ago or so. That is a Civil War era bayonet that was discovered on the Harris property, which would have been along the Oregon Trail, or the Westport Road of the Oregon Trail. And it's from the 1860s. It was made in Prussia, according to a Civil War expert that I talked to. And he said it was probably used as a Union training bayonet. That is a boot spur from the early 20th century that was also found out on the Harris property. Here we have a couple of little pistols that were found here in downtown Eudora by metal detectors. That's called a sad iron right there. That's a coal hammer that says Eudora, Kansas on it. These are some medals that were in the Gerstenberger family. They are Union Army medals. And I was told by the donor that these were made from melted Confederate cannons, which is a kind of a neat thing. Up here we have the Cardinal Head from the Eudora High School mascot from the late 90s. That's some ornate carvings from the Kaw Valley Bank at its original location at 700 Main Street. Over here, this tombstone has kind of an interesting story. This is a tombstone that was originally made for Peter Westerhouse. He was the first Westerhouse to come over here into Eudora from Germany. Of course, we've had a lot of Westerhouses in Eudora since then. And he died in 1876, and he was buried out at the Day Family Cemetery. Well, his wife died many years later, about 40 years later, and she was buried next to him. And when she died, they decided to replace this tombstone, and they got them matching tombstones. So I guess this was considered trash, basically. It somehow ended up in Lawrence. It was discovered in 1979 on Mass Street when they were redoing some cement work on Mass Street. It was used as a well covering on Mass Street. And the Watkins Museum got it around probably in the 1980s, and they gave it to us a few years ago. So it made its way back home here to Eudora. And so Peter Westerhouse isn't actually buried right here. He's still out at the Day Family Cemetery, but this is his original tombstone. This is a trip hammer from the early 20th century from the Zimmerman blacksmith shop. This was given to us by Harold Zimmerman, who's still alive. He's in his 90s. He was a World War II veteran. And this was at the Zimmerman blacksmith shop. It's called a trip hammer. And they used this. It was steam-powered originally on a pulley system there. Eventually, they did put an electric motor on it, as you can see right there. And I guess the Zimmerman blacksmith shop moved to Lawrence, and they became Zimmerman Steel. And when Zimmerman Steel closed shop, the Zimmerman family gave us this trip hammer. And I can tell you it's by far the heaviest item in our collection. It was very difficult to move, but we did. We moved it from the Nottingham School to here with a lot of help. This is Pete's pen collection. Pete Lawson liked to collect pens, and I think we counted over 1,100 pens in this collection at one point. This is mostly Eudora schooling related items here, including a basketball trophy from 1937, a typing trophy from 1942, an old girls bowling trophy, as well as another basketball trophy from 1935. And that's a picture of various girls at the Holy Family Catholic Church from the 1890s. That's a plate from the Hesper Academy. The Hesper Academy was essentially the first high school here in Eudora. It was built, started in about 1884, and it closed in 1914. This is more high school related items down here. More high school items up here. That's a piece of art of the original school in Eudora. Over here, that's a little sign from the Salem Chapel. You can see the year 1870 on it. That's a window from the original Holy Family Catholic Church building from probably 1860s. This is our display on the Civil War in Eudora. The Civil War was a very big part of our history here in Eudora. Eudora was a German immigrant town, so it wasn't directly a northern or southern town per se. Ultimately, when the war came in 1861, Eudorans were, of course, overwhelmingly on the side of the Union. And in 1863, William Quantrell rode through Eudora, or just south of Eudora, rather. He didn't ride through the town itself, but Quantrell and his men rode through Hesper in the Eudora Township on the Oregon Trail, and they killed a few men out there, and they kidnapped a young boy named Jacob Rote, who led them into Lawrence. He was allowed to live. The people in Eudora were alerted about Quantrell's presence, and a few men tried to warn Lawrence that he was about to attack them, but they didn't make it in time, unfortunately. And the men in Eudora were prepared to engage Quantrell in a battle had he come back through this way when he fled Lawrence, but he fled Lawrence on a southern route, missing us altogether. This is a display on mostly Kaw Valley Bank-related artifacts. Kaw Valley Bank is probably the oldest business in Eudora. They've been around since the 1890s, and over the years they've made lots of different souvenirs and items, and we have a very big collection of all the things that the Kaw Valley Bank has made over the years. And they're a very generous patron of our museum, so we highly appreciate the Kaw Valley Bank. Over here, this is a tombstone that belonged to Isabel Johnson, who died in 1861. She was a 7-year-old girl when she died. She was born of former slaves, I should say. Her parents were born into slavery in Virginia, and they came out here to Kansas, which was a free state. And she died in 1861, and she was presumably buried at the Southwest Cemetery, which is today, or which became the Black Cemetery, rather. And this tombstone somehow ended up on Doc Holliday's property, which is right next to it. Doc Holliday was nice enough to give it to us. A few years ago, Stephanie Jones cleaned it, which is why it's all nice and white today. And she's leading the efforts. Stephanie's currently leading the efforts to try to rehab the Southwest Cemetery and also just expand on what we know about it and try to learn as much as we can about it, because it is a very important part of our history, and yet a lot of people don't even know about it. And so hopefully within the next few years here, we'll have a lot more information on the Southwest Cemetery, and it'll be restored. So we're very excited about all the work Stephanie's doing about the Southwest Cemetery. This is one of the most notable things in here, in my opinion. This is a utility pole that was at 7th and Main Streets here in Eudora for many years. I think it was 2013. I was driving by it one day, and I saw this red X painted on it. So I figured they were probably going to replace all of these old poles with new ones, and of course that's what they did. Well, right before they did, I requested the Public Works that we could have a cross-section of this pole, just because it has a ridiculous amount of nails and staples into it. I've never seen a pole with that many nails and staples into it. Obviously, for decades, people hammered in all sorts of signs for garage sales or missing pets or what have you, and no one ever took any of the nails out, of course, and so this is what we have today. At one point, we counted over 1,300 nails in it and about 500 staples. And so people kind of sometimes think I'm weird, but I think that's a very big part of our history. It's very unique, if nothing else. That's a painting of the Victory Movie Theater, which was here from about 1942 until 1966 when it burned down to the ground, unfortunately. We haven't had a movie theater since. That's a picture of Debbie Barnes. She was Miss America 1968. She lived in Eudora in the 1970s, so we can claim a Miss America from Eudora. This case was put together by Glenn Jackson. It shows Emmett Wright and Phil Everly's Eagle Scout uniforms. They were the first Eagle Scouts here in Eudora, and they had quite a bit of badges, and so we're real grateful for Glenn for putting this together. This is a display that was made on the veterans, World War II veterans from the Eudora area. So we had quite a bit of people that served in World War II here in Eudora, of course. That is a memento box from Fred Reitz from World War I. He was a World War I veteran, and I know it's hard to see because of the glare, but those are items that he collected from that war. This is a display case on the Sinclair pumping station, which is that large brick building south of Eudora on Church Street. And we have a little model of it here. The Sinclair pumping station was built in the 1920s, and it was an oil pumping station. It closed in about 1940, and the only building that remains is the large pumping station building. But originally there were workers' houses just south of it, as well as a water tower and some other buildings, but only the pumping station building itself remains today. So this is the back part of our water exhibit, which mostly focuses on the flooding of the Kaw Valley and the Kansas River. Major floods happened in 1903, 1951, and 1993. The 1951 was the major flood that caused the most damage. It was after the 51 flood that they started to try to control the rivers better, and they built a series of dams throughout Kansas, including a dam on the Wakarusa River, of course, which forms Clinton Lake, which has really helped with flooding, and there's far less flooding today. And of course, but the 51 flood was just a horrific disaster, which really scarred the Eudora area for many years, and anyone alive during that time will tell you how just awful it was. Up here we have a picture of the Sunflower Ammunition Plant and a painting of the Salem Chapel right there. And so to tell you a bit more about our building itself, when we were given this building, it needed a lot of restoration work done on it. For instance, our limestone walls, which you can see right now, were covered in really deteriorated plaster. So Bill Gordon really led the efforts to try to restore these walls. Bill Gordon's an excellent mason. And a team of us all restored these original limestone walls here. Bill Gordon did all the brickwork right there with Benny Dean and volunteers. And this floor wasn't even here when we first got the building. We had a dirt floor. The original wood floor had rotted away and had termite damage. There was a lot of water damage in this building when we got it. And so we poured a new floor. We had to put in new plumbing, which was done by Tim Shepard. We had to put in a new HVAC unit, which was done by Westerhouse Heating and Cooling. Aaron Thacker did all of the electrical work here. It was a complete remodeling, essentially. This building was just a shell of a building when we got it. And it's quite a bit different today. Originally, this was a door that went outside, but in 2016, we were awarded an $89,000 grant from the Douglas County Heritage Conservation Council, which allowed us to build this addition here. That is a door to the elevator, which goes up to our second story. So because of that grant, we were able to build this addition, and now it's much easier to go upstairs. Previously, we had to go outside to go upstairs, which was not very convenient. And right here you can see the original wall of the exterior of our building. And so obviously this has all been added on. There's our elevator door. And so we do have some artifacts up here, but we have a lot of empty space up here, which we're going to fill with our core exhibit eventually. And we'll probably keep this space open for temporary and traveling exhibits. This is the Hesper Curtain. This hung at the Hesper School, just south of Eudora. It was made about 1938, and it shows a lot of the different businesses in the Eudora area at the time. And some of these businesses are still there, like Claw Valley Bank, for instance. And Jim Harris was nice enough to find this at an estate sale and give it to our museum several years ago. They tore down the Hesper School in the 1960s. They stopped having classes out there probably in the 1950s. And so this part of our building is one of the oldest parts of our building. That's a Cub Scout, Boy Scout exhibit made by John Scott, rather. So this is our original brick walls here from the 1860s. That is some linoleum tiling that was probably put on in the 1920s to 50s. That's not original. When we got this building, all the floor up here was rotted and covered in layers of linoleum like that, so we just put in a new wood floor. And anyway, that door goes up to our attic right there. This is one of my favorite parts of our building here. This was found in a window frame that was covered up by plaster. It says JAS, which is John A. Siebold. He was one of the earliest people that worked and lived in this building. And of course there it says Eudora, Kansas. So this was probably from a shipping crate. And this door was in this building as well. This was restored by Leonard Hallman several years ago. So when this building was first built in the 1860s, it was a tin shop on the first story. Well, first it was probably a shoemaker shop by Henry Koch, and John Siebold had a tin shop down here. But he lived up here with his wife and 6 kids and brother-in-law in the 1870s. So this was very crowded living quarters by today's standards, of course, to have all those people crammed in on this couple of rooms here. So when we got this building in 2013, all of the walls up here originally looked like that. It just shows you the extent of the deterioration of this building. And Bill Gordon and Benny Dean restored most of our walls to look, how it looked originally when this building was built. This building would have had plaster walls, of course, when it was originally built. And we decided, though, to keep this part exposed, just to show people the building techniques from back then, as well as some of the other unique features of this building. You can see some of the old wallpaper right there, for instance. So you can see even on the second story, they built this wall with limestone. And if you look into the bits of plaster here, you can still see some horsehair and some straw. They used to mix horsehair and straw and items like that into the plaster to help bind it together back in the 1860s. And we think these cut marks were made to help the plaster grip onto the wood there. But that's our best guess. We don't know for sure, but we think that's an educated guess. We have wood ceiling up here in this part of the building as well. Nice views of downtown Eudora out of those windows right there. Bill Gordon made this nice brick archway right here. Of course, this is an original window from the 1860s. And if you go up here, you have this part of our building, which we think was built around 1880. And you can tell this part of the building was built on second, because you can still see the siding from the north building right there. So when we got this building, the siding was all covered up with plaster, but we stripped off the plaster to reveal the siding. And it was in this window frame that we found the JAS piece of wood that I just showed you a few minutes ago. And so this part of the building is largely done. This part of the building was in total need of rehabilitation, just like all other parts of the building. And Benny, Dean, and Bill Gordon have led the efforts up here to restore this part of the building to make it suitable for our museum. And they've done a great job. And hopefully very soon here we'll be able to fill this part of our museum with our core exhibit, which is our plan. Out here you can look out here and you can see the old Mason building, which the Pelzells restored here recently. You can see the top of the coffee shop, and you can see out the back window. Looks like some skateboarders out there right now. It's a good place for that. So yeah, we've been real happy here. We've been in this museum for about 5 years now, and we look forward to being here for many more years, and we want everyone to come visit us when we reopen. We think that we have a lot of important history in this building. We think Eudora is a very important historical town, and we try to document the history in this building as best we can. And we're always growing. We're always adding new items to our collection. And, so if you come back here, chances are we'll have something new for you to look at. Bring your friends, bring your family. Come visit us. Come to downtown Eudora. And thank you for watching. I'm trying to flip the camera back around here. So yeah, thank you for watching. And we'll get through this pandemic together. And once we've gotten through it, come down here to downtown Eudora. Lots of stuff to see and do. Thank you.